Okay, thank you, Susan. Pleasure to be here today. So what I'd like to do today, let's make sure I can, yes, and I can advance my slides. I'm going to talk about business architecture, but business architecture perhaps in a different context than you're used to discussing the profession. So business architecture, as I'm sure most of you are aware, grew up in enterprise architecture and IT strategic planning. But today in many organizations, it's evolved far beyond those roots and is now more of a facilitator of strategy execution that in some cases even sits in the strategic planning group. And I'm going to argue for this forward-looking and not so forward-looking. I think this is alive and well in many organizations today. But for this enterprise role, this strategy execution role for business architecture, and why this makes sense. And I'm on the board of the Business Architecture Guild as well. And if you talk to those folks, if you look, say 10 years ago, about 70% of business architecture groups were under traditional IT enterprise architecture, and only about 30% sitting under a business function. Today, that's flipped. About 60-70% are under a business function, oftentimes strategic planning, and only about 30 or 40% are still sitting under traditional enterprise architecture and IT. Okay, so there's been a huge transformation over the last decade, and that transformation continues. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategy, alignment, and execution, the problems we've had historically with the notion of alignment. I'm going to talk about the role of business architecture to facilitate strategy execution, talk about portfolio management integration, which I think is a key component of effective strategy execution. And we'll talk about an additional role for business architecture as a facilitator of internal enterprise-wide innovation, and then talk about the importance of a well-developed value measurement program and all of this. So we've got a lot to do. I'm going to go fast over some topics because we only have a little over an hour, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with a Dilbert cartoon. I think we all feel like we live in a Dilbert cartoon many times. I know I do. And the reason I like this one in particular is that we all want to feel like what we do aligns with the strategy of the organization. But the realities are most of us have no idea whether our work and our projects really align with the strategy as it is at that point in time. So we're going to talk about why. But let's look at a few stats first. So according to Michael Porter, very famous consultant, author, researcher, more than 80% of organizations overall, not just corporations, do not successfully execute their business strategies. And that's either in part or in full. But he estimates in majority of these cases, the reason wasn't the strategy itself. So it's not that the strategy was bad, but because of poor execution. And that this failure to execute is one of the most significant challenges facing all types of organizations today. And then, as this was in the video that you just saw, you know, and there's different stats around this, whether it's 75%, some are higher, some are lower, depending on, you know, which analyst firm you're looking at. But I think we all agree that a majority of projects, IT projects, often fail to meet their business objectives, either outright or in part. So it's not surprising that many people point to a lack of business and IT alignment as a major contributor to poor strategy execution. But is it really? You know, is business IT alignment the real holy grail? You know, we've been talking about alignment for decades, and we've been conditioned to believe that business IT alignment is achievable, and it's what we should be striving towards. But is that real? I mean, is it really achievable? So let's look at a few things. So the alignment literature tends to go back to the early 90s. The Henderson model is often cited, and the Henderson model, you know, asserts that it is possible to directly align IT and business strategies. And if you look, if you go out and Google, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that's been written over the last few decades on IT business alignment. I mean, just, you know, hundreds of thousands of articles. It's just amazing the amount of material that's out there. However, I would argue that today our organizations are no better aligned for the most part than they were 30 years ago. That we still have the same problems today. So why is that? Obviously, all the writing that we've done over the years hasn't really paid off or hasn't made much of a difference in most of our organizations today. So the Henderson model, at the heart of it, states that the inability to realize value from IT investments is due to a lack of alignment between business and IT strategies. So as I said, it assumes that direct alignment between business and IT strategies is desirable and possible. And I'm going to argue that while it might be desirable, that it's not possible. And I'm going to argue why, but then talk about a more pragmatic approach. Okay, also, along this same line of thinking, enterprise architecture, if it's staffed and positioned appropriately in an organization, can be a bridge between to strategy execution. But in particular, the business architecture component of enterprise architecture is really the linchpin and that bridge that's often missing or not working well in many organizations to facilitate strategy execution. I'm also going to challenge some of the traditional thinking around enterprise architecture today. This is the traditional, the four traditional layers of enterprise architecture that I'm sure many of you seen, many times. This has been around for a long time. We have business architecture, data and information architecture, application architecture, and then the technical or infrastructure architecture. And what I don't like about this traditional model is that it kind of implies that each one is about a quarter of the importance or effort. And I couldn't disagree with that more. I think business architecture is squarely at least half, if not more, of the total overall equation. And if you don't get that right, the rest of this is going to be done incorrectly as well. And then just real quickly, the enterprise architecture frameworks essentially all try to do basically the same thing. Identify the current state of your organization in these four major areas. Then identify your desired future state in those four major areas, and then do a plan, a roadmap on how you're going to get from current state to future state. Let's go back to our alignment discussion. So does alignment lie with strategy? Hopefully you have a business strategy. It could be to focus on expand to new markets or increase your penetration in your existing markets. There's many, many different types of strategies that are possible. But if the strategy is clear enough, it should help decide between competing projects. That if you're trying to decide whether to invest in project A or project B, if you understand the strategy and it's clear, it should be then clear on which option best supports the strategy. The IT strategy and all it entails has to align with the business strategy, doesn't it? That's what we've been conditioned to believe. Otherwise, why have one? However, if you think about, realistically, and I'm a very pragmatic person, and I've been a CIO in a past life. It's hard to write an IT strategy that dictates the directions of things that are expensive and take multiple years in many cases to implement or aren't easily changed, like large enterprise systems, ERP systems, etc. So you have a platform of applications and tools that it's not, you just don't change it on a dime or on a whim. So an IT strategy is a seriously weighty thing to put together. Then, if we add to that, in most industries, especially in today's world, the strategy is not static. It's constantly being tweaked with conditions on the ground. The old adage, no plan survives contact with the enemy, definitely applies to strategy. So in some industries, your strategy might be changing frequently. But according to Porter and many other expert authors, less than 5% of people in any given organization have a good understanding of what the business strategy is at that point in time. So you have something that's changing, maybe changing frequently, depending on your industry, and that less than 5% of the people at any point in time understand what the strategy is. So how in the world can you ever hope to align something like an IT strategy with something that's changing and very few people in your organization understand? It's just not possible. It's not. So we're going to come back to what is possible. So the frame of reference for information technology strategy it is not the business strategy, and that's what we're arguing here. That just from the items that we just pointed out, it sounds good. Theoretically, it makes sense, but pragmatically, it's just not possible to have tight alignment between your IT strategy and your business strategy. And we've been conditioned, I like this graphic, to believe that IT is this separate thing apart from the business. This is kind of what I call the old world view, where if we can just get the IT people to understand the business, be better aligned with the business, a lot of our problems will go away. I don't believe that for a second. I think in today's world, the IT people, IT is just another part of the business, and your information technology people need to understand the business just like all of the other areas of the business understand the business and business concepts. And conversely, I would say that our business folks today need to have more technical acumen as well. And this is really a failure of our business schools. The IT programs often sit under computer science or engineering, and they get very little business. And then conversely, in business schools, we teach spreadsheets and analytics, but we teach very little, if anything, on enterprise technology concepts and acumen. So I think we really need a rethinking of how we educate these professionals in higher education today. But that's, I'll get off that soapbox. But I see higher ed has a role to play in all of this. So if the job of the IT strategy isn't to align to the business strategy, and I would argue it's not, I would argue the job of the IT strategy is to give the business many options to change tack as possible as your strategy is changing. So it's a provider of IT capability to support strategic business capabilities. So as you need to change business capabilities, as you need to spin up new capabilities, maybe you need to decommission old capabilities that are no longer needed, the IT strategy and IT infrastructure should be able to support and help change tact and change business capabilities as needed, as the strategy dictates. So the idea is that you're not aligning with strategy, you're aligning with the needs of your business capabilities and the owners of those capabilities, who then are in turn aligned with changes in the strategy and what that means to the changes in your business capabilities. So the business capabilities are this interim alignment layer, an interim alignment mechanism that provides for an effective alignment mechanism between IT as a provider of support and capability to those business capabilities and changes in the business strategy. And that's why understanding your business capabilities well and having a good understanding of what those capabilities are and their needs is crucial today. And we'll talk more about that in a few moments. So let's talk about what a capability is as well. You talk about business capabilities and business capability modeling. So at a high level, there's many definitions and perspectives. So this is one. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but it's, I think, a fair definition of a business capability. Business capabilities are business blocks, building blocks of the business. They represent stable business functions. They're unique and independent from one another. They're abstracted from the organizational business model, and they capture the business interest. And we'll show you some examples here in a second. And then you often put the capabilities together into what's known as a conceptual capability map. I'll show you an example. So here's a simple example of producing a research report, where you have capabilities for data gathering, concept development, analysis. Those capabilities then in turn enable and form processes. And then the process of producing the research report produces the finished product or service. So that's essentially how capabilities form and enable processes to produce the desired service or product. And then from here, a capability map for the different processes and the capabilities that are needed to support those processes might look something like this. And then often we will want to categorize our capabilities into, and you'll see different names for these categories, but they, whether it's a Gartner, Forrester, or whomever, they all have three-level categorization for business capabilities, but they might call them a little something different, but the concepts are all the same. Advantage capabilities are our R&D capabilities. These are our capabilities that are going to give us kind of our next generation products and services and keep us viable in the marketplace. Strategic support capabilities are those capabilities that you use to run your day-to-day business, but they're kind of your secret sauce that you would never outsource. These are the things that, maybe a proprietary business processes or other things that, really provide you with an advantage today in the marketplace. And then essential capabilities are the keep the lights on type of capabilities that you need just to operate. These are often candidates for outsourcing. So then we might go back to our capability map and understand which capabilities are which. So ideally, we want to invest more in our R&D capabilities, our advantage capabilities, and less in the keep the lights on commodity capabilities that we might outsource. However, many organizations today, you spend more on the keep the lights on stuff and not as much on the R&D. It can be very revealing when you actually do this exercise and realize where you're spending your money. In an ideal world, like I said, you want more of your funding to go to the R&D and the capabilities that are going to position you well for the future, and less to the keep the lights on, more commodity capabilities that you might outsource. So it's easier, much easier, because it makes sense to sell this type of strategy back to your business leaders. The IT organization is providing capability and support to change tack quickly to the core business capabilities, which then are in turn aligned with changes in the business strategy. So having capabilities as that interim alignment mechanism, it works, it makes sense, and it's how we should be thinking about this stuff, not a direct alignment between IT strategy and business strategy. So a few other things. Focusing on IT alignment with strategy really distracts the IT organization from the real work of understanding the business and how it's going to support the business capabilities of the organization. And you're starting, over the last several years, you've seen a lot of from Gartner, Forrester, and others, you've seen a lot of writing that supports these concepts, that alignment, direct alignment, is actually not desirable and can actually be a bad thing if you strive for it, because it's not possible and you spend a lot of resources on it and it becomes very counterproductive, rather than understanding your capabilities and focusing on supporting the core business capabilities of the organization. I like the last one, use the head of sales rule. If the head of sales wouldn't say it about sales, then don't say it about IT. That everybody needs to be thinking and communicating in terms of the business. And that's where we're going to come back to value measurement at the very end of this, because if you can't really communicate your value to the organization, then you might be a candidate for outsourcing or worse, because if people don't understand what you do, then they might create a perception that is incorrect about the value that you're really adding to the organization. So we'll come back to that thought. Okay, and we're going to get into value measurement and other things in a few moments. So this is a different way of thinking at all levels. So here's a few simple examples. So when you talk about budgeting, and again, the old thinking is we're gonna show how we save costs to the company. And if that's the only way you communicate your value, you will have a utility mindset, or be seen as a utility that can be outsourced because you're a cost to be managed. A much better place to be is where you see you have a more of a portfolio approach of investments and how you're able to support decision making to make those investments, and how you're able to support business capabilities to support strategy, and you're able to communicate and measure the value that you're adding to new products, to strategy execution, etc. It's a whole different way of thinking. But if you can get there, and you can get there, then you're seen as a strategic partner or a strategic consultant in the process, and you're a group that would be seen as an enabler of strategic advantage and never considered to be outsourced. So again, very different way of thinking. You need different people that think this way as well. Honestly, nobody cares how many servers you virtualized. And if that's how you're thinking, it's two different universes in many ways. But we really got to get around this more of a business oriented way of thinking and communicating our value. And I'm going to come back to this. So a little bit on value communication. Um, I'm going to hit more of this at the end. I don't think I'm going to say much here, but again, not communication on how much money we've saved and how we've contained cost. It's how we're contributing to what the business does and how we're contributing to revenue generation for the business. Very different way of thinking and communicating. Okay, so let's start talking about, so kind of set the stage for some of the issues. Let's start talking about the role of business architecture as a facilitator of strategy execution. Okay, so this is this comes from a kind of a seminal book in enterprise architecture. It's been around since 2006. It's been around for quite a while. But what I like about this graphic is that it shows that enterprise architecture can be an effective bridge between strategy and execution. But I would argue, I'd take it one step further, that it's really the business architecture component of enterprise architecture that is really that bridge between strategy and execution. And I would say that the traditional model of enterprise architecture that we've all seen many times is a very dated model, and that the future model, or a model that I like much better, looks like this, where business architecture is the foundation for everything that we do. And if you get that foundation wrong, all the stuff that comes after it's going to be wrong. So this is, more than 50% of the equation. You got to get your foundation down well. You got to understand the business, and then all of the other components have a good foundation to be built upon. So what is business architecture? Again, there's different definitions, perspectives. I'm not saying one is better than the other. This is a definition. I'm not saying it's the definition. But at a high level, business architecture, you understand your organization's business and operating model. You understand the strategy of the organization and what the organization's striving to achieve in the future. You understand the markets and market trends for your organization. You identify, this next one's a big one, business capabilities that are required to support the business and impact on different areas of the business. That's a huge one. And you create deliverables that can help drive business case analysis, investments, and help inform changes to strategy as well, not just strategy execution, but changes to strategy. And this is a more comprehensive and more progressive definition of business architecture, rather than its traditional roots in IT, where you might just be the IT process modeling group. That is dated, old, and needs to be taken out behind the barn, in my opinion. This is where we want to go, and where many organizations have gone with business architecture. A few more things about business architecture. Some of the major things that we think about: understanding the capabilities, the business capabilities of the organization, understanding value stream and how value is produced within the organization, understanding where information is stored and how information flows, and then the organizational structure as well. Those are some of the major components. And you can see the graphic below, business strategy, and then the business architecture as the facilitator of the execution, the actionable results. And the actionable results are in the form of projects and portfolios of projects. This is why portfolio management is such an important component, project portfolio management. And I'm going to talk about that in a few moments. I like this graphic. It shows how the business capabilities are really the core of everything we do. And around that are different modeling techniques, different layers of the organization that are modeled, but they all, at the core of this, are the business capabilities. And I don't think there's much more to say here. We're going to talk about measuring success. And again, just another graphic that shows how business architecture at a very high level helps you define the operating model, the business ecosystem, the blueprints, if you will, to help facilitate strategy execution and keep strategy execution in the form of projects and project portfolios continually aligned with changes in business strategy. through changes in the business capabilities that are needed to support those changes in the business strategy. So this is a process. This isn't a one and done. This is an ongoing process of facilitating strategy execution and keeping the strategy execution in alignment. So keeping your projects in alignment with changes in strategy. And in most organizations, they can't tell you what strategies projects support. In some organizations they can, but in many they can't. And so they don't know, and this is the problem, they don't know if the projects that they're doing are still relevant to the current state of business strategy. They just know that we got a project, we got funding, and we got a timeline. But they often don't know whether that project is still as important as it once was, or maybe it should be killed as well. It's very hard to kill projects, but with a good portfolio management process that's aligned with business architecture, you have a greater chance of allocating your resources appropriately and killing projects when they should be killed, and ensuring that you're doing the right projects at the right time. We'll come back to this. Right now, we're going to get into portfolio management. So project portfolio management, it's the same as your investment portfolios, which aren't doing so well right now with the market being down, but still concepts apply. So we're trying to understand where we're investing and whether we're investing in the right things at the right time. And quick definitions: project, it's managed, clear, end date according to a set scope and budget. Programs, usually a collection of 2 or more projects. And a portfolio is a group of related initiatives, and typically a group of related projects. And what we're trying to do with project portfolio management is achieve a balance between risk and value. We have different risks for certain investments, and we're hoping for some payoff to the organization. And we also helps us understand. So with projects, we can have projects classified in the same 3 level categorization as we looked at with our capabilities. So you can have projects that are more keep the lights on projects, more projects that support current operations, or more R&D focused projects. So it helps to know which type of projects are getting the majority of the funding, and whether that's as it should be for your organization. And there are many different types of portfolios. There's project portfolios, there's capabilities and process portfolios, there are technology portfolios, and there are human capital portfolios. These are kind of the typical portfolios that we might manage and track within our organizations. And this is a very busy graphic on how portfolios interact with one another, or can interact with one another. So an asset portfolio spins off perhaps new projects that are managed, where we need to create new assets or do something with our assets, change assets, which spin off projects. And then the projects in turn might spin off new assets or changed assets, which then are managed in the asset portfolio. So the portfolios are all very interconnected. Okay, case is becoming very clear. However, this is not common in most organizations, but it should be, that we need an integration of business architecture and portfolio management. And I would go one step further to say that portfolio, if business architecture, so I'm going to put a caveat here, if business architecture reports to an enterprise-wide function like strategic planning, and it's a true enterprise-wide function, so if that's in place, then portfolio management has to roll up to that unit, in my opinion. If it's not enterprise-wide, and it's just if it still sits in IT, or if it's just in one particular part of the organization and it's not an enterprise-wide function, then this doesn't that statement doesn't apply as much. But if it is an enterprise-wide function, where I see companies failing at this, they do the business architecture work well, but if portfolio management doesn't roll up to business architecture, then they're begging and trying to influence the portfolio management people to change the portfolio accordingly, and that rarely works because it's in a different silo, different reporting, different agendas, And if this is really going to work, you got to control the execution piece. So if the real purpose of business architecture is strategy execution, and that's what I'm arguing it is, then you got to be able to control the execution, which is in the form of project portfolio management. And some organizations are doing this today. It's not as common as I'd like to see by far today, but it's happening. So let's talk for a few minutes about business architecture as a facilitator of innovation. Okay, innovation is driven by different thinking. Innovation can really, if we're an innovative organization, and innovation can be innovation in our external products and services, or it could be innovation in how we do things internally with internal innovation. But obviously, it can make a huge difference in the performance of our organizations. However, our IT people, our enterprise architecture people, and even some of our business architecture people that might be more technically oriented or analyst oriented, we're often trained for managing, not necessarily innovating or creating. We're trained in our educational programs to control, to manage risk, to reduce risk, whereas innovation requires a certain amount of risk. And it's rather than reducing risk, we want to manage risk. We want to take calculated risks, and we want to cope with change, and we want to be more visionary and strategic, and set direction for our organizations. And unfortunately, many of our educational programs today don't really facilitate that mindset and kind of drive us more towards the managing mindset. And our thinking patterns are often linear, especially for those of us that come from more of a technical or business analyst background. Linear thinkers tend to drive for order, seek control. They love processes, avoid risk, and resist change. And yes, that's not everyone, but in general, that's oftentimes in our field, the more of the typical mindset. And organizations resist change, and they, especially larger organizations with more bureaucracy, tend to drive more towards the middle. If you have a lot of rules, processes, I see this at universities. The innovators are often seen as the problem, not somebody that should be fostered, but somebody that needs to, kind of change the way that they always want to push up against the rules and the bureaucracy. And after a while, in some organizations, either those people leave or they get driven to a level of acceptance and mediocrity, which is a shame to see, but it does happen. And enterprise architecture, if it's not formed correctly with the right mindset, can be part of the problem. If you're the policy police in your organization and you're more concerned about enforcing policies than you are about fostering innovation, then you can be part of the problem of driving towards the status quo or a level of mediocrity. And really, when we talk about value to our organizations, if you look at the left-hand side, and this is typically what we often strive for with enterprise architecture and business architecture, at least at first, is being effective, efficient, and maybe improving. And that's okay, but that's not those aren't the big benefits of the organization. It's once you get out to the right-hand side where you're doing things that are different than anybody else, things that people thought were impossible when you figured out how to do them. That's where you get the really big benefits to your organization. But that's a very different mindset than somebody that's focused mostly on efficiency and effectiveness. And innovation isn't just about technology. It's processes, it's capabilities, it's understanding the organization, understanding the business model, all the things that are part of business architecture. And I'm going to argue that business architects, if the organization is positioned correctly in the organization and staffed appropriately. So those are two big caveats. You got to be at the right position where you have an enterprise-wide view, and you got to have the right people. Because what I've seen, you got to have people that connect the dots in unique ways, and not everybody does this. They may see the same dots, but they either don't connect them or don't connect them in unique ways. So you got to have some really creative people. But If you get all that in place, business architects have a vantage point that very few other people in the organization have to really connect dots and be hubs of internal innovation. And that's what this graphic shows here. That business architecture, the BA part of enterprise architecture, can, if it's staffed and positioned appropriately, can be a hub for internal innovations. And architects are the right people to do this. They're often very well connected. They have a vantage point in the organization that few people have. They can connect dots as a result, and have access to seeing all the different possible innovations in the organization that most people don't have. And they often know how to bring together the right resources and the right people to make it happen, which is the last slide here. And they're often trained and should be trained on evaluating opportunities and then doing a risk analysis around those opportunities, and trying to separate the wheat from the chaff on which opportunities are the right ones to pursue. Okay, now we're going to wind up with value measurement. Value measurement is something that's of importance to all organizations today, but it's something that in most organizations is not very mature if it's in place at all. And I like this quote: "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." And I think this goes with value measurement as well. What you measure and how you communicate your value is what you become. And like I said, value measurement is consistently cited as a top area of importance, but also cited as one of the lowest areas of maturity. And there's a lot of reasons for this. We've got almost metrics overload today. We have many different layers of the organization with many different possible metrics, and there's an overload of possible things we could measure. I like this quote from The Art of War, and I don't mean to imply that our stakeholders are our enemies, but if you think about it, if you know your stakeholders and you know yourself, you won't be imperiled in 100 battles. So this means you know your stakeholders, what they value, you're aligned with their value systems, and you know your own internal group, your internal business architecture group, and where your strengths and weaknesses are. But if you don't know your stakeholders, understand what they value, but you do know yourself, you'll win one and lose one. But if you don't know your stakeholders and you really don't fully understand your group's strengths and weaknesses, you're going to be imperiled in every single battle. And I think there's a lot of truth to this. And enterprise architecture and business architecture can address C-suite concerns, but only if you understand what those concerns are and how they're measured and how you support those measures. Lots of KPIs. I'm not going to read everything on this chart, but there's a lot of different KPIs, but what gets measured gets improved, or what gets measured gets done. I think that's a very true statement. So the problem isn't a lack of metrics. It's knowing which ones make sense for your organization and provide the most value for the effort required, because it takes work for a metrics measurement program. So we have a framework that I'll talk about very briefly, and I'm going to end on this, that I've used with different organizations. And the idea here is that one size doesn't fit all. So the things that you should be measuring in your organization are very different from what somebody else should be measuring in their organization. So these analyst reports that you see from the big analyst firms, that these are the top 5 or 10 metrics for business architecture or enterprise architecture, I hate those articles, because they could be the totally wrong metrics for your organization. And even the analysts that put them out will admit privately that, hey, that's our company's position, but I agree. These might be the wrong metrics for a particular organization. So a better way to think about this is understanding a couple things here. Back up. I moved off of my slide prematurely. So I'm going to do this real fast. We want to understand who are our key stakeholders and what do they value. So not every stakeholder in the organization, there's too many, who are the ones that are really key to what you do, that have the most power and influence and interest in what you do. So, and what do they value? What are their KPIs that they're measured against? Then we understand what are the core business capabilities for the organization and how are they measured? What are their KPIs? Then we're going to look for that space in the middle of the Venn diagram. Those KPIs that if we can positively influence them, impact the greatest number of key stakeholders and greatest number of core business capabilities. And if you can identify those KPIs and you can positively impact them, then you're on your way to becoming a very valued strategic resource. So this is a way of down selecting from the universe of all these possible metrics that you could possibly measure. It's down selecting to get a group of, no more than 10. I like around 6 or 7 really core metrics, KPIs that impact the greatest part of your organization, and KPIs that you feel you can positively influence. So then from there, so we select those KPIs that we feel we can positively influence. We're going to select projects to improve those KPIs that are involved with those KPIs. And I'm going to suggest that those projects should be of moderate complexity, not so simple that your critics can say, my high school senior could do that, but also not so complex that you have a high risk of failure, especially as you first start out. This is a process as well. So there's going to be annual governance around this with your key stakeholders and the owners of your business capabilities to make sure you're still measuring the right things. Stakeholders are going to change over time. Capabilities change over time. If you don't update your measurement set accordingly, eventually over time, you might be measuring the wrong things. So this is a process. This is not a one and done. And then communication is extremely important. If you can't communicate the value that you're generating effectively, then all this other stuff doesn't really count for much or matter. So you need to have people that are skilled in a variety of methods of communication. One size does not fit all. You have to understand how your key stakeholders and owners of your business capabilities want to be communicated with, or what's the most effective method for, and it will vary. So it's not just one method that you're using for the whole group. You're going to have to vary your methods depending on the preferences of the individuals involved, and you're going to have to do it repeatedly. So this is a communication strategy, and you need people that are thinking about, what's the most effective way to handle the communications. And if you don't have these people, you need to hire them. If you can't hire them full time, you need to rent them somehow. But you need to have people that understand how to communicate. So this can't be, none of this can be the other duties as assigned, as I like to say. We all have in our job descriptions your main duties, and then other duties as assigned at the bottom. This needs to be, all of this needs to be a main duty for somebody. It might not be a full-time role, but it needs to be something major that they're evaluated against, and not other duties as assigned. Otherwise, it won't get the attention that it deserves, and it won't work. That's as simple as that. Okay, so a lot more to around value measurement. I actually have a webinar that I've done for CAI on value measurement, so you can go out and dig around the archives and pull it out and get into all of this in much more detail. Okay, and I've mentioned this is a process. This is not a one and done. This is a process. Okay, the last thing I'll mention, then we'll open it up for Q&A. We have a number of online degree programs at Penn State that might be of interest to this group. We have an online, and these are all related to business architecture. So what's nice about our online portfolio, you can mix and match different pieces depending on your interests, because many people come into business architecture through a variety of backgrounds and twists and turns. Some are more business oriented, some are more technically oriented. So these are some of the major programs that appeal to people in this space. We have many others, but these are some of the ones that appeal to people in this space. We have an online master's in business administration, an online master's in enterprise architecture and business transformation, an online master's in corporate innovation and entrepreneurship, an online master's in data analytics, and an online master's in project management. And you can do concentration areas in business architecture in any of these master's programs. We also have online graduate certificates, which are typically 3 or 4 courses, and then can lead to a master's program or can be concentration areas in other master's programs. We have graduate certificates in business architecture, analytics, enterprise architecture, and a variety of other areas that you can see listed here. So all of these are concentration areas and all of the master's programs, or you can just take the standalone online graduate certificate if you want and just get that chunk of education. So please let me know if you have any questions. You'll find all this on our website as well, more information about these programs. So I've made it through, this is a picture of our business building, made it through that large slide deck. Appreciate you all hanging with me. I know I presented a lot of information quickly, and I'd be happy to take questions now.
We did have one question from someone in the audience asking if they can get a copy of your presentation, and we leave that up to you, Brian. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead and share it. I'm happy with that. That's no problem.
Okay, great. We typically ask Rosaria if you could email Brian, if that's okay, and then Brian, you can send that out in case you want to create a PDF or something. Brian, thank you so much for presenting with us today.
Okay, thank you.